All right, looks like we have a bunch of people. So welcome everybody to our very first Sercante Ungated session. We are so excited to be kicking off this series. I'm Christina Magoulas. I'm a marketing manager here at Sercante. Our first session is migrating to Google Analytics 4. Now's the time. Today, we are going to have a few house rules that we'll go through. Rich, if you could just advance the slide. Thank you. First up, yes, we are recording. We will be posting the recording to our YouTube channel. It will be on our website, and we will be following up with an email, including a link to the recording. Please share with your colleagues. You will be getting that email later this week. We have had you all join muted with your videos off. We ask that you please stay muted, just that we don't distract Rich, our awesome presenter. Please, throughout the session, feel free to drop questions in the chat. We will be having Q&A at the end, though we will try to answer any quick questions that we can in the chat in real time. Lastly, we'd love your feedback. As I said, this is our very first Sercante Ungated session. We'll be sending a survey out in the email follow-up. We'd love to hear your feedback on this session, what went well, what topics you'd like to see covered in the future. We really just want to create a space for marketing operations professionals and Salesforce marketers to meet and talk about the hot topics that are happening in the marketing landscape these days. In terms of chat moderation, you have myself, again, marketing manager and training product lead here at Sercante, Sarah Cloth, a VP of marketing, and also Google Analytics whiz, as well as my cruiser, CRM and marketing automation and solution architect, the longest title that exists in the world. With that, I will kick it over to Rich to start our presentation for today.
Hi there, thank you. So as you can see here, my name is Rich. I'm a CRM and marketing automation strategist. I am also Sercante's Google Analytics champion. So how Google Analytics can fit in and support all the work that we do across Pardot, Salesforce, and all of our other marketing automation solutions. If you can't tell already by the accent, I am from the UK, not from the US like the rest of my colleagues. But without further ado, I'm just going to jump straight in. So the agenda today, what we're going to run through is a high-level look of what actually is Google Analytics 4, what's the differences between the old and the new, how do we as marketers need to change and start to adapt to some of the elements that are going to be coming in with Google Analytics 4, what is the impact on Pardot and Salesforce, what migration steps we might need to take. Then I'm going to chuck it back to Christina. She's going to run through some of the other upcoming events that we have with Sercante, such as this one coming up with some of my colleagues doing some great talks as well. And then we're going to go into a bit of a Q&A. So the team are going to answer any questions that they quickly can in the chat as they come up. But anything that might need a little bit more of a detailed response, we're going to wait till the end there as well. So do just drop any questions you've got into the chat as we run through. So firstly, kind of the main reason why we're all here in the first place is, what is Google Analytics 4? So Google Analytics 4 is the new version of what most of us have been currently using of universal analytics. So if you've been using Google Analytics to track your website activity at the moment, and all of the great data and metrics you can get with that, and you've been using the free version, you're most likely to have been using Universal Analytics. Now, the changes between them is Google Analytics 4 is going to be utilized and utilizes a privacy-focused approach and uses first-party tracking to be future-proof. Now, I'm sure all of you have been hearing a lot of changes around first-party tracking instead of third-party. If we throw it back again to Pardot, you know, there's changes in place already for that, moving from third-party to first-party. So this is something that everything in the market is starting to switch towards as well. So this is Google's response, or one of their responses to that as well. It's also going to bring in extra machine learning. So what that's going to do is that's going to start to help us unearth insights about the customer journey across platforms and devices, as well as start to fill in some of the blanks that we might have come up along the way, as well as start to just kind of future-proof the product as well. And then lastly, GA4 has enhanced seamless integration with some of the other Google advertising platforms to be a bit more optimized for campaign performance and help to drive greater marketing ROI. So those platforms being Google Ads, just as an example there, it's got much simpler integration into that and is kind of purpose built for that ability to seamlessly integrate there. Now, some key dates and a bit of a word of warning now as well. So until June the 30th, 2023, you can continue to use and collect new data in your current Universal Analytics properties as part of your Google Analytics account. So on July the 1st and after that date, you will be able to access your previously processed data inside the Universal Analytics properties. And that will only be for 6 months at the moment, maybe a little bit more. After that date, we will no longer be able to collect any new data. So from July the 1st, no new data will be being captured by your existing Universal Analytics properties. As part of this, we are strongly encouraging, sort of picking up on what Google has been saying, strongly encouraging everyone to export your historical reports before they are gone forever, after that kind of 6-month window. If you are using Google Analytics 360, those properties will receive a one-time processing extension. So you won't have to it won't stop collecting data at that June 30th, July 1st crossover time. It will be October the 1st. So you've got a little bit longer to get aligned on how you need to do that. In the coming months, though, we'll be looking at providing, there'll be future dates that come in for when the existing Universal Analytics properties will no longer be available to access. And after this date, you will no longer be able to see any of your reports in the interface or access the data by the API tool. So this is our word of warning here, that we really need to be looking at this as a changeover coming up now. And the reason for that is if we want to be capturing year-on-year data for comparisons, we really want Google Analytics 4 set up by June the 30th, 2022. That way, what we'd do is you'd be running your Universal Analytics and your GA4 properties side by side for a year. So you'll be able to understand the data differences between the two better. And as part of that as well, you'll be capturing data in the new GA4 property that's going to allow you to have year-on-year comparisons as part of it. Now, these are just some very high-level screenshots of kind of what the new Google Analytics 4 looks like inside. So it's a slightly different layout that we're seeing. And as you can see, something that's becoming more relevant or stands out instantly here is very much events. Events are going to be one of those main focuses we're seeing within the switch. So everything is becoming an event. Now, if you are looking in your Google Analytics property at the moment and you haven't yet upgraded it, and you're still looking at a Universal Analytics property, you're going to start to see this warning at the top, which is giving an exact warning of what I just explained there around those dates. And it's suggesting that you start to switch and migrate to the new Google Analytics 4 property now. You'll also see if you're going into Google Analytics and you're creating a new property from scratch, or you're creating a brand new account as well, if you don't have it already, it is going to be saying there, it will not by default create a Universal Analytics property. It will create a GA4 property now. You do have the option there to create an old universal one, but it's suggested not to, as you can see by the slightly more aggressive red warning compared to the blue one. So looking at that, what are going to be some of the differences between the old Universal Analytics and the new GA4? So firstly, in the old Google Analytics here at the top, we've got page views and custom events and page views. All of those are events now. Everything is being registered as an individual event. So it's going to give us more in-depth ability for reporting. And it's also going to allow us to break down different interactions better. So not everything's going to be bundled into sessions. We're going to have events within what would traditionally have been a session. So there'll be events for every step as part of that. Now, we've got some comparisons here between different terminology on the audience side. So Universal Analytics, you can see there's a few changes there in some of the terminology between the two. And there are some that don't directly correlate as well. So one notable thing on here is bounce rate. So bounce rate, traditionally, we're looking for a low bounce rate is good, because that means people are coming to the website and then not leaving straight away. Whereas here, we're looking at things like engagement rate. So we're actually looking for how they've engaged with the content, which I know that's what the bounce rate was doing, but it's now got much better terminology around it to define that, and some slightly different metrics involved there. The other thing we've got is an acquisition and behavior comparison. So you can see here, we've got a bit of a different breakdown again between our acquisition and behavior terminology. So again, a lot of those things is being looked at slightly differently with different names. The biggest one to call out from this page is very much going to be around those event categories, event actions, and event labels. We don't have that naming convention anymore as it looks there. By default, all of our events, we can create them with a category, an action, a label, and a value. Now, everything just has an individual event name. We have the capacity to do more events, but everything just has one individual event name, and we can customize the dimensions of that, but everything relates to just one name instead of built up of three now. So one of the big questions now we're thinking about is, how do we as marketers now need to think about how we change ourselves to fit in to this future look? So as I've mentioned already there, we've got a kind of breakdown of some positive changes and some negative changes here. So one of those positive changes is, we've probably got our compliance teams starting to ask us questions, if they haven't been doing that already, around what's our first party consent, what's our first party tracking, what does our consent look like, how are we doing that? Here, we've got a very privacy focused mindset. So we can kind of go back to them and go, it's already been built with that in mind. It's designed to work with or without cookies and is durable for the future. So just to dive into that a little bit more, there is Google Analytics 4 will be using first-party tracking cookies, but those first-party tracking cookies will only be firing when someone has consented to be tracked. When they haven't consented to be tracked, we're actually going to be looking at that second bullet point as a way to fill that in. So using that moving on from that is we've got intelligent machine learning to focus on the customer journey across our platforms and devices. So one thing to think about here is, as I mentioned, we're not going to have consent to track everyone as we do at the moment. Google, again, in 2023, near the end of 2023, they're going to be also sort of removing the ability to support third-party tracking cookies. I know that might have been extended slightly. I don't know the exact date, so don't hold me to that. But they are looking to move to first-party tracking only as cookies. As part of that, if someone doesn't consent to that cookie being dropped, then it won't drop. So what happens instead is GA4 was designed with machine learning to start to fill in those gaps and model out our data better so that we have a consistent level of data still coming into the system. We're not going to see huge drops of data when consent isn't captured compared to maybe now where we might have third-party cookies firing. So that's going to start to give us upfront the same volumes of data. So we're not just suddenly going to see a huge drop-off. It's going to fill the gap with machine learning. Now, we don't know the exact numbers, but that could potentially be based on some consent data we've seen. Somewhere between 40 to 60% of users might not be fully consenting in to be tracked by cookies. So this is definitely going to be a big part of how our future data is captured and modeled. We've already mentioned again there the enhanced seamless integrations with the other Google advertising platforms. So looking at Google Ads as well there, just as an example, it's a lot easier to integrate the data between the two. Google Tag Manager also becomes a little bit simpler to use as well. And in some cases, we can actually do things by default in here that previously we would be having to use Google Tag Manager to do as well. We also are going to get better audience segmentation with events. So one of those things that we're seeing is at the moment, we just have kind of 4 main parameters around events. Now we're going to see the ability to have 25 in the new GA4 as opposed to the current 4, which I mentioned were category, action, label, and value. So we're going to have a bit more capacity there. We're also going to have up to 500 distinctly named events that we can set in GA4. So what that's going to do is, with more insight into the data and actually more unique events to capture from based on that event name, we're going to be able to better segment our data as part of that. Now, some negative changes that come up, and I don't know about you, but sometimes we come across teams, and sometimes we do ourselves, where we're a little bit negative to change. So, you know, not everyone likes change, and sometimes change for change's sake isn't good. But in this situation, it is. So, going to make a positive out of a negative there. The data will look different, right? So they are going to be taking away some of our deep dive stats that we have in there. And a little shout out, a bit of a flashback to when they took away our rich keyword data. But with it looking different, the positives and negatives that it will look different, but we will be getting more insights in other ways as well. We also need to start to have a bit of a rethink around some of our reporting. So some of the metrics won't be available. Mentioning again, those event category, action, and labels are no longer going to be supported. We'll have to be looking at how we create some custom events to support that as well. So having those custom named events to try and collate some of those together that we had will need to come into play on some of our reporting. We'll also probably needing to start to think of changing our mindset there as well around, okay, previously we're basing a lot of our information on sessions. We're basing a lot of our information on page views as well. Starting to think terminology-wise around events and conversions. So using those two they're going to be what our focus is going to be on moving forward and trying to get that into our mindset. So a page view is a view of a page, but it's also captured as an event. Okay. The next one there to think about is we're going to need to be thinking about our property and view structure. So the way in which our universe analytics works at the moment is we have one property and we can have multiple views of the data captured and held in that property. And it's at the view level at the moment where we distinguish our goals. And we have 20 goals per view. Now, those goals on those views are triggered by a number of different things. We can use custom events for that, but we could also use things such as page views as well. That is going to be slightly different on those goals, right? So I'll touch on that a little bit there, but our goals are now going to be moved from views. We're no longer going to be using that view aspect. Everything is going to be a bit more managed at the property level. So instead, what we're going to be having is 30 goals per property. And those goals aren't necessarily going to be called goals so much. We're going to be using that terminology I mentioned before of conversions. So conversions are going to be the key thing for us. Now, a conversion doesn't mean they've made a purchase. It could be that a conversion is a form fill as a lead completion, or a conversion, using that goals conversions, is the event of someone visiting a particular page. Where previously we could have a goal directly off that page view being done, now what we'll need to be thinking about is that page view will need to be captured as an event, and then that event can be used as the conversion. So that's why it's page view, event, conversion. So next up, what is going to be the impact on Pardot and Salesforce here? So this is probably one of the questions that we get asked a lot. What are these changes going to impact us? So as thinking around that, it is a great question. And the short answer is, at the moment, not very much. One of those big things that we're going to do, and one of the big things that first thought when we read it as well was, oh God, they're going to make a change to it. Are we going to have to reconnect it and reset things up? As it stands at the moment, we cannot see that you'd need to make any changes to your Google Analytics connector to the Marketing Cloud tools, which is the account engagement, or Pardot there. And that's probably the biggest aspect. We don't have to make any changes there. Yes, there may need to be some changes around Google Analytics code that we fire in, say, thank you pages or in form completion thank you codes. But for our actual connector, there's no change. And the way in which we capture UTM parameters as well, if we're capturing them using hidden fields on Pardot forms, again, no issue there that we can see at the moment. That will not change. You will still be capturing those in the same way. And I put a note here that actually we are seeing this as a bit of a positive change. We're actually going to be starting to align our data a little bit more across multiple platforms as well. So we're going to be thinking about moving everything to that first-party tracking as well, and also aligning our reporting data and our metrics and our mindsets as well on when we're looking at events. That in Google Analytics 4, that event can be a form completion in Pardot. That event could be the page visit of the thank you page. That event could be the download of a particular asset. And so that's one of the really good things that we're going to be having a look at there. And I think it's going to open up some really good possibilities around how we can align our data a little bit better. So the next step there is actually, now we've been talking about it, what can we actually do to start to look at migrating our current Universal Analytics over to GA4? So we now have under 2 months to really get GA4 set up and to be able to have a full year's worth of data, as I mentioned earlier, to see year-on-year comparisons when we switch over to 2023. Now, I'm not saying that when you make that setup in June the 30th, 2022, so this year, that you stop using Universal Analytics altogether. You can run them both side by side. And I would suggest doing that for a while anyway, just to understand the data differences between those two systems. But there are some really nice steps here. And as Christina mentioned, we will share the slides after this as well. And there are some supporting links off here to some other migration plans and documents as well that can be used from Google. And to get started, what we need to do, and we've been doing this ourselves for our own internal orgs as well, is mapping out what our current property and view structure looks like and what we want it to look like in the future. So what filters from all of our views do we want to apply at the property level now? And how do we align them down into suiting that better? Do we need more than one property as well if we're doing that? So we need to have a think about some of those. Next, we'd look at setting up our new GA4 property. And we'll cover some of those steps after this slide as well. But it is initially that bit is the simple part, right? The next is creating data streams. So that's where the data comes into GA4 from. Now, what we would probably do is, depending on how you're using it, you're definitely going to need one data stream. So you're definitely going to be wanting to look at websites. The other data streams as well, there's three, there's websites, apps, and the last one escapes me, but I will look it up and come back to that. But we can create data streams for those three. I think it's iOS, websites and apps, and we can create them for those, and all those data streams flow into our one property. We then look at enabling the data collection. So that's, we make sure that we add any new tracking links. Or actually what you can do in the setup is you can say, please use our existing tracking codes that we have already. So if you are already using the GA tags, you can reuse some of those as well as you walk through. One thing that is suggested as well is to activate Google Signals. So that's enhanced tracking specifically around the ability of remarketing and demographic data as well within there. And then if you are using Google Ads for your paid search activity, then you can link it to your Google Ads at that step as well. Now, breaking it down, what you've done there is you've set up your new GA4 property, you've connected it up where it should be, and you're getting data flowing into it. Now, GA4 by default will start to capture some out-of-the-box events as part of that already, and some out-of-the-box conversions as well by default. So it's going to be capturing data for you already without you needing to do any additional setup. Now, if you want to replicate some of the events and some of those goals from your Universal Analytics to GA4, that would be the next step. You start to map out those events, and then you map out your goals and conversions and start to look at migrating them across so that they look the same in both, or as near as you can in both. Then we'd look to migrate any custom audiences we've got. So if there's any custom audience we're using as potentially in different views, we can look to augment them into the new property. Same with our e-commerce data. And then lastly, any other additional users and any other additional permissions that we need to migrate from our existing one across. There is a link off to the plan there. Now, I did mention the steps, and this is very simple step-by-step through of how you would do it. So for someone that doesn't have a GA account at all, you would create an account, or if you have one, you can confirm it, and that would be it. If not, you can simply just create a new account, and it will already redirect you through the setup process of how to create and set up a GA4 property. Next, you do that creation of the GA4 property. If you're already using a Universal Analytics property, and you saw on our previous slides at the start, you've got that blue bar that says you can start to upgrade. There are some really simple steps you can walk through to do that as well. You can actually just almost copy your Universal Analytics property to a GA4 one already and create one off the back of that, or you can create a new one by reading these steps. I won't go through every single step for you, but as mentioned, the slides will be shared so you can use that as well. And then step 3 there is, if you are currently using a website builder platform, so a WordPress, Webflow, something like that, that does require you to provide a UAID, you don't have to worry on that. You can still use Google Analytics 4. In order to do that, though, you will need to paste that global site tag, so the G tag snippet, manually into your website builder's CMS custom HTML field, and select your website builder from the table that's linked here, which is linked off to the Google Analytics walkthrough of that. And that will give you any specific platform instructions that you need to do on top of what I've just mentioned there. So that is the end of our initial slides and walkthroughs. So I'm just going to hand back slightly to Christina there to look at some upcoming other events we have before we go to the Q&A at the end.
Yeah, and we answered a few questions that popped up into the Q&A in the chat, but if you have more questions, feel free to drop them in there. I'm just going to talk for 2 minutes and then I'm going to give it back to Rich to answer all your questions. So I just wanted to let you guys know, we have some upcoming ungated sessions that are listed out here. Registration is going to be opening on our website soon, and we'll be sending an email to let you know when that does open. Hot topics that we've seen people asking about, when to use Marketing Cloud account engagement, which I still can't get used to saying that, because obviously I mean Pardot, or Marketing Cloud engagement. What's the best solution for you? That'll be next month in June. The death of cookies and the impact on MarTech in July, and accessibility in digital marketing in August. I also wanted to let you know about some upcoming training courses that we have. Rich, I'm sorry if you could just flick the slide. So Sercante Ungated is brought to you by the training group here at Sercante. We also run training courses for people who are looking to level up their Pardot and Salesforce skills. Coming up, we have an engagement studio workshop next week, and then we have 2 6-week boot camps kicking off. Clearly, I am so tied to the Pardot name that I couldn't change it for this slide. We haven't officially changed the name of the course yet, but consider this Code School for Pardot or Marketing Cloud Account Engagement, as well as Pardot Admin Bootcamp. Code School will take you through the basics of styling all of your Pardot marketing assets. Pardot Admin Bootcamp is really a deep dive on every aspect of the Pardot platform. So if you're interested, you can visit our website to learn more. I see Cruiser just dropped a link into the chat. So let's now dive into questions that you guys might have for Rich. I'm just going to peek into the chat now. Don't be shy. Okay. Do I need to put new tracking codes on my website?
Trying to be super efficient and unmute myself, but I should have just left myself to talk. So from that standpoint, as you can see, if you are already using the global tags that we mentioned above, then you can actually just reuse those for your new GA4 property. If you're not, then you will need to add that code to the website. So if you're using So for example, as I mentioned, if you're using the website builder platform, then, and that's requiring the UA ID, then yes, you will need to add that code to the website. So that can vary depending on how you're actually putting your current Google Analytics code onto the website as it stands.
All right. Next up, how will this affect my UTM capture?
So actually what we are seeing at the moment is it shouldn't be affecting the UTM capture at all. It should be completely letting you capture it in the exact same way that you are at the moment. We are not seeing, from anything we're doing, we're not seeing any implications or changes to that as it stands.
Okay. Any info on data import capabilities of GA4?
That is a good question. Haven't totally looked into that too much ourselves, outside of the difference between the current import implications. What we'd probably do there is have a look at that and get back to you in the follow-up email as well.
Realistically, how soon should we begin to start transferring over? How long did the process take?
Realistically, we should be starting now, basically. Not to panic or scare anyone, but you could start, the sooner we start the process, the sooner we're going to feel more comfortable that we've got it set up and we're not getting ourselves to that deadline. Now, hypothetically, you could wait until this time next year and set it up then. We would strongly recommend doing it before June the 30th this year for that year-on-year comparison of data in the platform. So you'll be able to see historical data. That's probably the biggest thing, because as well, you won't be able to access your universal analytics data as well next year. So you're going to want that ability to be able to reference back to previous data that you've got as well. That's why I was suggesting now, giving yourself nearly 2 months, probably about 6 or 7 weeks there to get it done. That's plenty of time, as long as you are dedicating time to it, right? The whole process can vary. I don't want to give a time of what it would be, and then you come back and go, Rich, you've lied to me. It's taken double that time. It very much depends on your org and how it's set up, right? If you're running a very streamlined org of where you have one property, one view at the moment, it's going to be a lot easier to compile that down and migrate that across than it is if you're using one property to 5 or 6 views, and you've got to compile the data down from that. And just, if you're utilizing all your goals at the moment, if each of those 5 properties has 20 goals, you're going to want to somehow compile those 100 goals down into 30 conversion metrics. You can keep them all as events, as different things to view them, but calling out your key metrics as conversions, that in itself as a process is probably a discussion, depending on how big the business is, you might need to go and speak to other people in the business and get their buy-in. So starting the process as early as possible is best. But as mentioned, if you really had to, this time next year would be your last sort of chance. Strongly recommend before this year.
The person who asked that question then followed up by just putting the word panic in the chat. So I wish you luck.
If you do have any questions or on that further, or would like some help with that, or planning and documents, we're happy to help where we can as well on that.
Next up, we have, how will this affect Pardot landing page tracking?
So as it stands at the moment, it's going, as I mentioned, it's going to count that Pardot landing page tracking with, we may need to update our code that is on that Pardot website for that, that Pardot landing page. We may also need to think about the terminology we're using and what we're looking at there. It's no longer going to be that page view element that we can call out as a goal. So if we're using, say, a Pardot landing page as a thank you page, we're going to need to have that tracked as a page, as a view, and then as an event. So it's not going to be that straight up page view that we've had before. But outside of that, it shouldn't affect the actual tracking of that page too much, as long as we've got the right code there and we're using the view, not page view, to trigger an event for us to recap and look at.
Okay. I'm just flipping through to see if we got to all of the questions. There's an implementation question. I see in conversions that purchase is totally grayed out, even though I have admin, no ability to toggle this on and off. Any troubleshooting ideas?
The purchase section.
Cruiser, I don't know if you can chime in with any ideas either for this.
Yeah, I'd need to visually see it, if that makes sense, to have a look exactly as what you're looking at there.
Right. This feels like an e-commerce capability with the purchases, and I think there's a spot in a setup where we can plug in like an e-commerce platform, and we can put dollar values for purchases and stuff like that in a setup somewhere. It might be with custom dimensions or something like that. It's been so long since I've messed with this. It's been like 5 years. So it's not at the top of my head, but I think the reason it's grayed out on your screen is because it needs to be set up elsewhere and then start populating data, and then it should start showing up. But I would look for like a Google search for e-commerce, Google Analytics e-commerce, and that should give you what you're looking for how to unlock that box.
Awesome. I think we got to every question in the chat. Hopefully my colleagues will keep me honest on that and shout out if we didn't.
I think there was one more I've just spotted myself.
Oh, no.
From Brian on one of our contractors already created a GA4 property, but I don't know if it was set up correctly. Can I create another one without conflicting with the other one? So yes, you can. Think of it as you would with a Universal Analytics property as well. You just need to make sure that you change out the tracking codes. If it's already have a tracking code on your website, right? You can create another one and have the same data stream feeding into it. And then you just remove that from the other one and kind of rename it as maybe old or redundant, and then sort of look to move towards the new one. There shouldn't be a conflict there around that setup, and that element of how you do that should still be able to be done.
Awesome. Rich, I'll leave it to you to wrap us up.
Okay. The only thing I can say from me then is thank you very much for listening to me doing a lot of talking for nearly 45 minutes. I hope you've found it helpful and that you come back and listen to some of my colleagues on some of our other Sercante Ungated webinars, and just a shout out and thank you to my chat moderators for helping me throughout that process. But everyone else, I hope you have a great rest of your day and week.